All right. So before I get started in detail, just know that I am mostly a computer scientist, mostly a data geek, and not really a marketer. So I won't have as many pretty presentations and like examples of bold creative as some of the presentations that you've seen. Overall, I've been in this industry a really long time, so pretty much going on 20 years. And by this industry, I mean applying customer data to help retailers serve their customers better in some form, pricing, promotions, loyalty, you name it. And one of the things that has just struck me over the past few years is how little progress we've made in those 20 years in actually applying data to make our customer experiences better. And so there's been some incremental improvements, right? If I go back 20 years and I ran a simple basket kind of cross-shopping report to see, who, if you buy Pepsi, what else do you buy, and across these a couple categories. Reports like that 20 years ago took 2 days to run, 3 days to run, depending on how you coded it. Now they can come back in minutes or seconds, and there's a huge advantage there. But what's missing in all of this is with all the extra data out there, with all the extra processing power, with all the different ways we have for reaching our customers, that for the most part, most retailers are still flying blind. So few retailers that I work with, at least, and I work with some of the biggest names all over the globe, are using data beyond the obvious. The historical purchase records, demographics, and things like that to drive their business. Fewer are applying sophisticated techniques like machine learning to find patterns that go kind of beyond the obvious. And vastly fewer are applying the insights to make their customers behave and engage dramatically differently, especially beyond targeted marketing in pricing, promotions, product, and areas like that. So the good news is that typically CRM and loyalty are the bright spots and the outpost of what it takes to run a successful broader analytics program. So today, I actually want to talk a little bit about that, right? So the 3 takeaways that I hope that you come away from today are that, one, that customer analytics has the power to transform the retail experience. We'll talk a little bit about that. Second, how you can set that up, and then third, most importantly, lead it from a CRM or a targeted marketing, basically lead from that group to drive analytics through the rest of retail. So I'm going to actually start with an analogy. So sports, when I talk about analytics in general, sports actually has the best, it's the best environment for developing analytics transformations. If you looked at sports over the past, say, 10 to 15 years, because it's such a controlled environment, they are changing every single aspect of the game through analytics. McLaren, which is the example here, is they completely rebuilt their cars. So they put 160 sensors in a car. They sent these cars out on all sorts of, I think this is Formula One, all the races that they did for 2 years. They collected all that information, and then they completely rebuilt the car from the ground up. You don't see retailers doing this, right? Let's see here. So imagine a transformative retail experience, right? You kind of start with, and I'm going to focus a little bit more on bricks and mortar just because it's a harder thing to change. But you have self-checkout, you have smart CRM, inventory optimization. So inventory is actually placed in the store and reordered based on what people are automatically buying, which is something that almost never happens yet. Real-time personalized promotions based on where people are in the store, what products need to be pushed, all of those different pieces that are just pushed to the customer. And even things like customer monitoring and beacons. Where are customers in the store? What are they doing? How are they, do I need to actually add a cashier? Those kinds of things. These are just even starting, we've been thinking about these things for 10, 15 years and are just now starting to hit in bricks and mortar retail environments. The point about this is the customers are actually demanding this change. You guys all know this, right? Real-time relevance, digital, mobile first, omni-channel, you guys deal with this every day. But a bricks and mortar merchant who's trying to decide which products to put in their store and how to present it, and that's kind of what they're thinking, they don't think about these things every day. They don't understand that their customers are on the store. The latest stat that I saw is that in Westfield malls, so if you think about just the physical bricks and mortar malls, I don't know if you guys have heard this, 55% of the purchases made within the walls of the mall are made on people's phones to sites outside the mall. Crazy, crazy. But then when you look at investment, it doesn't follow these patterns. So on the left side, can you guys hear me if I just talk? Or should I use does this one work? All right, so on this side, what you see is where is the growth going to come from in retail in the future? So this isn't the growth, this isn't kind of where things are today, but this is the growth in retail in the future. So essentially, 98% of the growth is coming either online or through online influence sales. Online influence meaning I went and researched the product, I looked at see what I could buy, even to the point of I just wanted to see when the store hours were open and when I could come in. So 98% of the growth in retail is coming from digitally influenced channels. And then over on the right side, you have investment. And this is for omni-channel retailers, and this is kind of for retail as a whole. What you're getting from capital expenditures, over 80% of the capital expenditures are going into these bricks and mortar stores. They're going into remodels, relocations, building new locations. And frankly, a lot of it is going into this core IT infrastructure of rebuilding the finance systems. Less than 20% of that investment is into digital experience, is into CRM, marketing, and analytics. By the way, if you guys have questions, feel free to stop me on a slide, because it's probably easier than going back. So just raise your hand. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. So this was, I believe, from a Gartner report. I can go back. I took off all the sources. But yeah. I might have been Forrester, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. But this was actually, this was basically predicting as we go forward where all the growth would be. So then let's translate that into actual results, right? So we saw where the investment was coming. Now let's actually look at the results. So this is retail, the retail industry over the past year. So on average, and lesser shading here, retail overall is growing at 3.5%. Makes sense, kind of with the cost of living, with all the averages. Electronics, toys and sporting goods, some of the things on the right side where, they've really made that online shift. Those things are growing less fast, declining, quite frankly. Partly because this non-store retail is actually considered its own category by the census, and that one's growing really fast. And then on the right side, obviously, you have at least a handful of the folks that have announced bankruptcy filings within the past year. So clearly something is a mismatch, right? The other thing that's happening is all of these, there's so many new models that are coming out there, and retailers really don't know how to compete in this. They don't know what to do with any of the stuff that's happening, even Uber. What do we partner with them? Are they a competitor? What do we do? Those kinds of questions. So it's really about thinking differently. And I'm a big proponent for analytics to fundamentally change the way that people go to market without taking away, I think you were talking about the art and the science. It's bringing the science in so to make the art better. So from an assortment perspective, it's going from, curation is essentially just not that important anymore. How do you have an endless aisle but make it palatable, make it work for your customers? Merchandising that is much more about the perfect page than it is the perfect presentation on shelf. Pricing that is essentially machine-led, where you're managing the exceptions to the rules. You're watching what's going on in the background and you're changing it, and you're managing the exceptions where things are going below cost, for example, or something like that. But you're not actually, it's not like a merchant is going in and saying, hey, I think this should cost $99, or I think this should be priced at $2.99, which is, frankly, in my experience, how 3/4 of the pricing decisions are made today. And promotions is really the other one, which is really transforming, as you guys probably mostly know, from very mass-driven promotional world to something that looks much more personalized and one-to-one. We know that the ROI is so much better on those. So we've done a lot of studies on this as a firm. McKinsey's done a lot of studies on this. And what's interesting here is if you look at this, if you look at the folks that have actually invested, their returns are better, right? So if you're investing in analytics, broadly speaking, not just CRM, but like as a broad analytics program, their profits are huge in comparison, right? They're much better. ROI is much, much better. Some of this is driven by Amazon, let's be clear, right? Because they're just the best performer in the country, but not all of it is. There are a lot of different examples of companies that are driving real, honest value through analytics. But here's the problem, right? So a lot of people are capturing value, and that was the previous slide. So in 2011, we did a study and said, okay, how much value do we think is out there to be captured across various industries? And I thought this was actually kind of fascinating because it was sort of an idea of, out in retail, how much value do we think that advanced analytics should be bringing to the sector over the course of the next 5 years? And then in 2016, after those 5 years, we actually looked back and said, how much did we actually capture? And so location-based services, which is like cell phone and mobile and things like that, they're capturing the most value. At the very bottom, you see like public sector and healthcare. They're just not capturing much value at all. And retail actually looks pretty good. The problem with the retail one, so this is saying that through the application of analytics, retailers are capturing 30 to 40% of the value that we predicted they should capture in 2011. The problem is that almost all of that went to customers, not to the retailers, which is why you're seeing the profit problem. So the actual results, EBITDA margins, the actual profitability of these retailers was pretty flat. So what this says is we were seeing basically this 30 to 40% of the value that we predicted all went into the pockets of customers because they were using analytics to figure out where to lower prices, to drive traffic, to offer more and more and more promotions, and it was sort of pseudo-analytics, right? Like we're not going to optimize the promotional investment. We're actually just going to use analytics to drive more promotions, things like that. So there's a lot of opportunity here. So what we did is we went out and said, okay, can we understand what best practice looks like? Can we understand across industries what are the things that drive successful analytics programs where they've achieved a lot of value versus the unsuccessful or less successful analytics programs where they've achieved less. And we looked at companies that were in the early stage, where they're just getting started. They're saying, we don't know exactly what we should be, but we kind of know. All the way to folks that have made a substantial commitment to analytics. If I look at Target just as an example, at the time that we did this, they had a 550-person analytics team in-house. Running analytics across almost every sector, every kind of vertical imaginable, from supply chain to CRM to merchandising, pricing, things like that. 6 things emerged. Pretty straightforward, but actually really important. And we'll talk through each of them. So the strategy. Do you actually know what you want to get out of your analytics? The data itself and how well structured, how accessible, how creative the data is. Models and tools, and this is less about the sophistication of them, although there's a little bit of that, and more about making sure that you're applying the right models into basically the right types of analytics to the right problems. Value assurance, which is a terrible name, but it actually means, do you have leadership commitment? Do you have the process and wherewithal to make sure that it's embedded into the day-to-day? Organization and talent, and I want to spend a little time on this one because it's much less about the analysts. It's much more about the translators and the business users that are actually putting the value into the business. And then finally, the culture itself. That an analytics business really needs a test and learn culture, and not being afraid to fail is actually one of the biggest opportunities. So with that, I'm going to have you guys maybe vote. So for each of these 6, we're going to walk through a poll. And so you can get your phones out. And so I'll read the statement up here, and from 1 is strongly disagree to 5 is strongly agree. So this one is on strategy. Our company has a compelling, aligned, company-wide vision for customer analytics and where it will drive our business now and in the future. All right. We can see where this is going, right? It's declining. So the initial ones were obviously like, no way, or yes, we definitely have that. But the idea here is that the best companies have a vision for where they want to apply analytics. It may be in supply chain, quite frankly. It may be in CRM. It may be in assortment, merchandising, whatever it is. But the retailers that we talk to that have a very strong vision for where they want to apply analytics and where they're going to make their investment, and by the way, it's not in BI, it's not in business intelligence, it's actual analytics, are the ones that are successful because they make the right investments and they're able to prioritize those investments. The piece that we want to talk about here is actually what are the best practices for that. So the long-term vision, which is an obvious one, but like where do you actually want to go? Where do you think the horizon is going with flexibility to change it? Aligning the analytics themselves to the broader strategic priorities. So if you really want to go into new businesses or you want to enter new markets, make sure that you're aligning to that. That one's fairly obvious. The one I want to talk to most is this use case driven one. So if you know, we'll talk a little bit about what a use case is. You guys have talked about it, I'm sure, from a technology perspective, but it also holds in analytics. And then also starting small and focused, actually proving out the value and then scaling from there and not trying to do too much at once. So the use case piece. So what is a use case, right? So it's very similar to a use case in technology, but in analytics, you kind of think of it as a business objective or a key decision that's critical to solve. I want to optimize promotional investments for in a certain category. For Target, it might be we want to optimize when and how deep to go for promotions for Black Friday, something like that, right? Something pretty specific, small in scale. It could be demand forecasts was another one that we see a lot, using customer data to actually create accurate demand forecasts. Limited scope with measurable results. Can we actually prove the value of this particular use case? This again goes to the idea of holdout groups, right? Can you actually prove the value of what you're doing here in the future so that if you want to scale it, you know how much that'll be worth to you? And it goes beyond just the math, right? This isn't just about applying analytics, it's about, how is the whole system going to work? I know where I'm going to apply this, the output of the analytics, to get a better answer and a better experience for my customers. And it's important for lots of different reasons. The main one is the focused effort. Because if you have use cases and you have them defined and you don't have too many of them, it's much easier for your IT partners, for your finance partners to really figure out where and how to invest. How many of you have been on a project where you think it's for one thing and then they just keep tacking on? We want to do a customer database that has these things. Well, if we're doing that, we might as well also add these 5 other flags, and then we also might want to add on all these customers that we don't actually have today. And we might also want to add another table for our product information. Like that kind of bloat just kind of it melts into the background if it's not really critical to this use case. So being use case driven for us has been a best practice. It's not just about, again, the analytics. It's about specific analytics, specific business decisions to make things better. So some use cases in retail that we've seen. These are mostly for customer data, though the right side is less so. But basically they're 4 domains of analytics in retail that we've talked through. Sales and merchandising are the ones that we deal with the most in customer data. But marketing and personalization obviously also use a lot of it. Ops and supply chain is probably where the most value is, quite frankly. Just sheer value to be had by employing analytics in retail. And then finally back office, which often goes unsaid or underappreciated in things like HR, employee retention, and whatnot. From a customer data perspective, the use cases that we see most often have to do with optimization, pricing, promotions, things like that. Localization, which is a huge one, especially for bricks and mortar. Which products should we have in the right places and how do we think about our local strategy? Personalization, which is very related to what most of you do, and then omnichannel. And then across all of them, some sort of category insights, data and analytics, those kinds of things run across the bottom. Frankly, those use cases are much less valuable or much harder to prove the value of. So like a BI tool, we typically say be careful of that because you're not going to be able to prove the value of a BI tool. It's going to become something that you put together over time after you've done the rest of this. All right, so that was strategy. So this is data. So the question is, we have a robust data ecosystem that gives us a complete view of our customers, who they are, what they buy, how they interact with us across channels. Fascinating one is nobody's in the strongly agree yet. So on average, this looks better, right, than the strategy. So clearly there's been some investment in data. But we still have no strongly agree, right? So historically, retailers are really good at like purchase information. I know what you bought. I know when you bought it. I can kind of tie that back to my hierarchy and figure out what to do about that. They're less good about some of the other pieces of who they are, what they buy. You know, we know the what they buy, but who they are and how they interact. Those are the two pieces that typically are the hardest. You know, because there's a lot of data here. So the left side is all internal data, things that we can collect, right? Website and mobile data should be something that should be easy to tie together. Shopper and insights, you know, there's all sorts of store and trade area data. There's all sorts of things we can do internally with our retail data. And then on the right side, there's all sorts of external data that we can append onto it or tie or stitch together. And so the point of all of this is just we actually, as retailers, in some cases, just have too much. And so as you define your use cases, actually thinking about what's the least amount of data I can get away with to be able to run the use case for the first time, to try it out and make sure that I can have value. And then how do I think about the data strategy over time to layer in the different pieces of data? So you may say, I'm going to start with my behavioral transactional data to understand how customers make decision at shelf. We do this at grocers all the time, right? So do they trade between Cheerios and Rice Krispies, or do they trade between Cheerios and Honey Nut Cheerios? You can tell a lot of that from the past purchase information. Well, it'd be interesting. You could probably also get some of that from how people responded to promotions. You could probably also get some of that understanding of how people switch by their browse data. What do they dwell on? What pages do they go to? Some of those kinds of things. You could probably get it from some other social media and photo and food logs and Fitbit logs as well. So how and where do you start to layer that in? And when do you rely on the behavioral data that is known and trusted versus the things that you're going outside for becomes the real question, because stitching all of this is expensive. Partnerships can help. I'm not going to go through all these right now. You guys have one that's obvious. But I do want to go through the best practices, because I think they're kind of, the last one in particular is pretty important. But progress over perfection, just kind of starting small, starting with your use case, and making sure that you have something really, really scrappy first, and then expand from there from a data perspective. I like to call them data ponds or puddles or mud puddles, but the idea is there that you have something to work with. Building in flexibility in your data and your sandbox is actually quite important. So I can't tell you how many people I've talked to, especially from a retail perspective, they're looking at their retail data, not on the customer side, but on like the item side, and they're saying, well, I have a hierarchy. I can't change my hierarchy, and I have no way to add flags. So if things are organized by vendor and not by the way customers shop, I can't actually change that. We have to create a whole new database to be able to flag every item in a way that makes more sense to a customer. Right, so I just was working with a grocer on that particular topic. Every one of their sodas was classified by brand, because that's how they dealt with vendors. And there was no way to flag the size, like was it bottles, was it a 12-pack, was it any of those things, 2-liter bottles, to be able to understand how customers really made purchase decisions. So those kinds of things are really important. So that flexibility is something that you should always be thinking about. You don't actually have to bring the data in first, you just have to build for the flexibility. Solving for identification, this is one of the #1 things I work with retailers on. Do I need a loyalty program? How do I make sure that I can get people to actually identify, especially when you're dealing with customer data? And then I'm going to actually switch to the bottom, which is the business owners who are making the decisions and actually applying the analytics are the ones that need to own the data strategy, not IT. and I can't say that, the companies that we look at where IT is the primary owner of the data and the data strategy, what gets structured in, how it gets prioritized, where it gets stored, all of those things, those companies are performing the worst on this particular metric. The companies where the analyst groups are the primary owners of the data strategy, and frankly, even of the databases themselves, do the best. So, not rocket science, except that IT loves to own this stuff. All right, next one. This one is it's a multi-part question, so bear with me, but we're gonna just answer it once, so kind of do the best you can. So we deploy a wide range of analytic techniques and models and are getting more sophisticated with time. And we are incorporating machine learning and prescriptive analytics into our arsenal to understand more about how we can influence customer behavior. It's interesting. This is actually, it's almost following what we see in other industries, because what we tend to see in other industries is pretty much a bimodal distribution. Either people are really, really good at this, and they kind of rate themselves a 4 or 5, or they're just, basic reporting, some slice and dice is all they can do, and they would put themselves up at the top. So it tends to be a very bimodal distribution, which is, we're not quite there, but definitely see a little bit more of a distribution than you would see in some of the other questions. So on the analytic sophistication curve, you've probably seen something like this before, right? On the bottom, degree of intelligence across the x-axis, level of insight across the y-axis. Hopefully you're not somewhere off of this grid, because if you have something with a high degree of intelligence but low amount of insights, that's probably not the right place to be. But the point being that there's data synthesis and raw data, and you kind of work up into standard reporting, drill downs, some sort of basic models, all the way up into predictive and prescriptive analytics, right? And the trick here is actually, from an analytics program point of view, what successful companies are doing across this is they're aligning the right people to the right types of analytics. So you don't have PhDs in stats that are actually doing standard reports, which can cause them to leave. At the same time, you're also making sure that you're applying the right analytic methods to the right things. So if you're doing a Monday morning flash report on how sales were over the, with different customer segments over the weekend, you don't need to be doing predictive analytics. You need to be doing standard report or kind of ad hoc reporting, or maybe some drill downs. On the other hand, if you're trying to figure out which segments to go to sell, the right kinds of products, you might be looking at something that looks a lot more predictive, an advanced tool like some of the ones that we saw here. The machine learning piece is what I'll plug, because I actually been a proponent of machine learning and the types of things that it can tell us for a really long time. And basically, as you think about the data world expanding and the number of points of information we have on every single customer, the feasibility of using an old kind of traditional model is getting less and less applicable and less possible, right? So if you just think, and this model itself is, I cribbed a couple of the graphics, but basically imagine a heat map when you look at, do I provide a retention offer to somebody? Are they likely to churn, right? So if you look at a heat map, which individual is likely to churn and which aren't, you might get a pattern that looks like this on a couple of different axes. Traditional models would have you basically say people at the top are likely to churn, people at the bottom are not. I'm going to give a rich offer to all the people at the top. You may be giving a lot of offers to people who may not need it, and you may be missing people at the bottom, obviously, that do. So what machine learning can do is help you identify those patterns that are non-obvious. And this one is obvious. These are obvious, but we have a lot of times where these patterns are not obvious. And this is getting more and more important to be able to employ through tools. I'm not saying that all of you have to become coders, but finding the tools that employ machine learning, deep learning, and the like are becoming more and more important, because otherwise you're going to miss and not be able to provide as much value. And the example that I'll use here is in Beacon beacons. So this was actually we did some work with a retailer who was considering beacons and kind of what they could do and what the model would take, right? And so basically, this is not in the US. So there was beacon technology, people that subscribed to the app so we could follow them around. And what they were doing is getting push notifications based on where they were in the mall and where they were outside of the mall and all sorts of other things. And so we ended up having to use machine learning to create all of these different layers of clusters. So it's not just a traditional segmentation, but you kind of end up having to stitch all of this data together to build what we called nano markets. And so at the very bottom, right, you had to understand what's the underlying profile of the mall, or of the market. Where are the stadiums? Where are the malls? Where are the points that people engage in? And actually use machine learning to kind of understand where are people on their phones and where aren't they, right? And understanding what are the drivers of that. There's a consumer data layer, an audience layer. we then built out a propensity layer, so where are people likely to engage in certain kinds of activities, which is the fourth one. And then the final piece, which is where are my clients today? And so putting all this stuff together, if you think about it, we could never have done it with traditional methods. It's just too complex. Too many layers, too many points of information. And so relying on some of the deep learning algorithms that we were able to find these clusters and tag them much more effectively so that when customers were in the right place where they would respond, we could send them the right offer. So that was data. That was analytics. This one is a fairly straightforward one. Our leadership is committed to analytics. All right, and this is one of the more positive ones. Love it. This is great. So the point on leadership that's important. I mean, obviously you have to have a kind of a set of leaders who's committed to investing in analytics and making that sort of long-term change. But more importantly is how people interact every day. Are the leaders actually asking the right questions? Are they asking for the proof? Are they asking for you said you did something that was incremental. Can I actually see the calculation? Can I understand why it was incremental and what was driving it? So how our leaders behave is one of the biggest drivers of success. And the ones that are the best at it are actually, in high-performing organizations, the initiatives are all the way up to the top. The initiatives are actually sponsored by the CEO. At the less high-performing organizations or low-performing organizations, most of the initiatives are coming from not even like the CMO or the chief merchant, but they're coming from a level below. So making sure that you have, at the very least, your head marketer or your head merchant be your proponent, if not your CEO, is a huge, huge benefit. All right, I was going to spend that much time on that one because that's less interesting than this. All right, we have talent that can effectively apply what we learn about the customer through analytics to the business. We are adept at understanding how business questions can be answered through analysis of our customer data. This is great. This is reflective of the audience. If I ask a bunch of merchants, just for the record, when I've done the same question with a bunch of merchants, I've got mostly 1 and 2s. So I think reflective of the marketing audience, we're getting something that looks a little bit more positive, not all the way to bright, but a little bit more positive there. Let me talk through some of the roles, right? So this is a slide we use. This is, again, not specific to customer data organizations. This is for any kind of analytics organization, but there are a couple of roles that are important. And so you think about let's first talk about the skills that are required for analytics, right? 3 skills. Business skills. Do you understand what the business problem is? Do you have business, do you have business acumen? Do you understand what the levers are for profit, for loss, for customer retention, things like that? So basic business skills. Bottom right, analytic skills. Can you actually take, are you able to understand numbers, and do you have facility with numbers? Bottom left, technology. So can you actually do it? Do you have some sort, in a company, you need people that can actually do that and turn it into something that looks like a tool. And it doesn't actually have to be within your own company, it could be outsourced, right? But there are those kinds of technological skills, otherwise you can't scale. If everybody's going in and writing their own code, they can do the analytics, but they can't do the technical piece. As an organization, you're gonna get a lot of coders, but not a lot of productivity. And then in the middle, you basically, so there are a couple of different roles that you need. And the most important one, some of them are obvious, right? A data scientist is obvious. A coder, model developer is obvious. The people that sit at the crux of this are the interesting ones. We've talked a little bit about the data steward, but I think we can come back to that one. The most important role on this is the business translator. And so a business translator is somebody in our world. It tends to be in my team at Target, it was somebody that sat on the insights team, but they can be in a lot of different kinds of roles. You probably have lots of folks on your teams that look like this. You are probably one of these people, quite frankly, if you're sitting in this room. But the people that can say, I can talk to a business owner, I can understand what their needs are, I understand what their business questions are, I can translate that into the different ways we could use the data we have at our fingertips or the analysis at our fingertips to solve your problem. So, and then they can go and talk to the data scientists and say, hey, can you help? This is the analysis that I want to run. This is how I might structure it. They're also more adept because they can work across multiple different data sources and different types of analysis. So the best people at this understand, when do you go and use satisfaction survey results? When do you go and use customer purchase and historical purchase information? When do you go use third-party information like Nielsen? Right, so they're working across a lot of different sources, and so that data science and analytics pool may be multiple people, maybe also primary research. When do I need to go out and do primary research? When do I need qualitative research? So that business translator is the single hardest person to find, but also the single most important role in a company to making sure that an analytics program is successful. And it is the entire, if you were to, you can outsource anything else on this other than the business owner and the business manager, because you can't outsource that, and the business translator. Every other role can be outsourced or handled by technology or whatever. The business translator can't. And the important piece there is also a lot of these business translators from a profile perspective are essentially early career, right? They're somewhere in the range of 24 to 35, reasonably early in their career, and they're becoming the business owners of the future. And so if you also have a good, the people that are doing this the best they have a way of translating this and actually moving people from the business translator role into business manager roles over time, so that those business managers also have a really good grasp of what data-driven decision-making looks like. So if you're going to invest in one person, invest there, and then figure out the rest of it, because there are lots of different ways to run the rest of the model. All right, last one. Our organization embraces a test and learn culture. This is also what I was hoping to see. There's a huge bias here too. If you ask merchants, they're not allowed to fail, right? So I do a lot of merchants who are like, well, we'd like to do that, we'd like to try that, but we can't fail. And so if we can't fail, you can't do test and learn, right? Because you can't learn if you don't fail sometimes. So this is also, I think, fairly reflective of the room in terms of who's here and the roles that you play, which is great. I mean, you guys know what a test and learn process looks like. I don't have to go through this, but I think it's really important. One of the things that we do with our clients when we put analytics programs in, and we actually operate a lot of these, is that we use essentially a sprint and backlog, an agile process for running analytics. We do it in CRM, but we also do it in even things like supply chain analytics. Same process works. Something that you guys know really well. Which brings me to the point here, which is that marketing organizations within retailers are the best positioned to drive analytics programs in retail. And it's because you guys have a lot of the things already on the ground. You have use cases that you can prove the value of over and over again. You have data, and you have an understanding of what data exists, what doesn't, where you can go get it, what the holes are, and you own that data strategy to some extent. You have ability to apply some more sophisticated tools, whether in-house or outside. You know how to run tests, you know A/B logic, those kinds of things, which a lot of folks don't know. You have easily quantifiable data, which we talked about. Almost all of you are probably translators in some form, so that really, really valuable skill set which is critical to the success of a program, is already there. And finally, customer-driven marketing, like the work that you're doing, is essentially the epitome of a test and learn culture. So what does that mean? It means that you guys have to start the revolution to push analytics into other parts of the retail business. So making analytics the priority, understanding the idea of a multi-year commitment, and then really the third one I think is one of the most interesting in building the agile culture within the company. And then finally, I think from your perspective, making sure that you're forging the partnership with new leaders. So become an evangelist, go to your merchants, go to your supply chain guys and say, hey, I have all this data, I have all these insights, what are we gonna do about it? I know that these people respond better to this type of campaign and these people respond better to that type of campaign. So should we be changing our merchandising to adjust for that? Humor's growing. Do we actually grow our selection of humor-based products because we know that that customer is responding better to our marketing than anybody else, and maybe there's an opportunity there. Those kinds of things become one of the things that you can do from your seat. So that was basically what I had, and we went through these 3 messages. I can open it up to questions.
So you showed a chart that had just a ton of online data, offline data, and all of it could be helpful.
Yep.
But as an organization, how do you decide, how much of it to use? When do you stop? Because you get into analysis paralysis, which I find sometimes happens. So, how do you kind of think through how much data you want to kind of add on into your,
So I'm a huge proponent is using sounds weird, as little data as humanly possible to answer the question. So what I tend to do is and I push teams to do is to start with what's the core data for the company and the very basics. So at Target, that was always purchase information. We could tie it to a customer, we had a really good match rate. We could say, hey, that was the core data. And if we needed to know more, then we would start to pull that in. So the next order question is, well, it's really it's really interesting. It seems like we have these segments, but I'd really like to understand more about what they do in this area or what they do outside. Some of the most interesting things are like, I'm working with a retailer now who is seeing essentially no price elasticities on some of their products, and they're just flabbergasted because they're competing head on head with Walmart. And so one of the things that we had to go do is say, okay, well, where else could we get this information? And so we're working with mobile companies that can track basically where people go in different geographic areas, and understanding that actually within a given week, there's no cross-shopping with Walmart. So even though they serve a lot of the same customers, those customers aren't cross-shopping on a regular basis. Being able to prove that was really useful, but it wasn't necessarily a customer identified something. It was for a specific use case and a specific question. We could go answer that question discreetly. Now we know the power of that data, and so then the question becomes, do we bring it in more broadly, do we not? Other questions? Yeah. That is the $1 million question. If I go back to I can go back to the Venn diagram. Translators should sit as close to the brand as possible or to the business unit as possible. It doesn't mean they have to be part of it, but they should be aligned, right? So if you have multiple business units, even at Target, we had food and apparel, very, very different businesses. We had somebody assigned to food and somebody assigned to apparel, and they didn't mix. In different brands, you have the same kind of thing, right? You don't want to have the same people assigned to the same brand because you want them to be as close to the business as possible. When you get into data scientists and things like that, you can do a COE. The biggest question for big brands or for multi-brand houses is how you make decisions about where to invest and who gets what money. And that actually should define it, because if you have different brands making decisions about what to do, you're going to need dedicated capacity for those brands to be able to pursue the initiatives that are most important to them. So if you have one brand A is really into CRM as a use case, and brand B is all into pricing, you want to make sure that as an analytics team, you're able to have dedicated capacity to those two, or even have separate teams. If you're making centralized decisions about which use cases to prioritize across all the brands, then a centralized team is much, much easier, and you can flex a lot more. It's not a great answer, but it is I see the pendulum go back and forth, right? So the pendulum, I would say 3 years ago, was to have big central COEs, and now it's gone back.
Part of it has to do with wanting each brand to measure and have methodology be similar. So when it all comes together at a corporate level and you're comparing campaign times one, you want to make sure that there's some type of
Consistency. Yeah, and you don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? I mean, it's expensive to have everybody working on the same problem. The other piece of it is kind of thinking along the sophistication curve. The more exploratory your analytics, the more sort of experimental. Those should be closer to the brand, but as they get more rote, more more reporting related and everything else, those can be more centralized and offshore, frankly.
Are there sort of consistent backgrounds that you see, like consulting or banking, that sort of breeds good translators? And if not, like, how can you as a business suss out during the interview process if somebody's going to be successful in that role?
So I'll use my time at Target. There's no individual profile that is perfect. I typically would look for consulting background, marketing background, and or merchant background, being a merchant. And so I would look for 2 of those 3, essentially, because I figured, and then there's probably there was a 4th, which was actually deep analytics or research skills. And so if you look for a couple of those different pieces and people have more than one, then typically they can be pretty successful. My way of doing it, just because I'm a consultant by nature and I grew up in consulting, I actually do loose cases. So when I was actually hiring, it wasn't so much I'm going to give you a very strict case and you have to be able to solve it. It was more of a, what retailer do you like to shop? Why do you like to shop it? What is most, how would you change? Questions like that, where you're actually probing their thinking outside of the tell me a time when you influenced another human being. Any other questions?